Handle Your Business, a weekly podcast discussing a little of this and a little of that. Handle Your Business appropriately blends serious topics with fun topics, all in an effort to help you have a good or better life. So join me, your host, Lady Lashley, and some amazing guests every Sunday at 5 p.m. to explore everything from financial management to dealing with relationship challenges. Put it in your calendar every Sunday from 5 p.m. Tune in to Handle Your Business for a very helpful half hour to get you ready for the week ahead. For more details, follow at Lady Lashley TT on Instagram and Facebook. Handle Your Business. Welcome to Handle Your Business with Lady Lashley. Today I have with me Garnet Lawrence. Garnet is a father, husband, son, many other things. Among all of these things, he's a Black man based in this space. Garnet, welcome to Handle Your Business. Thank you for agreeing to join me.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I'm really glad to be here because as someone who has been a teacher, the idea of men speaking about fatherhood and men being good examples to other boys of what fatherhood is important to have in this space.
Right. And there you have it. For those of you who are listening to this podcast, we are discussing fatherhood. And this is extremely, extremely important. Garnet, you are no stranger to discussing this topic. That's why I asked you to join me for this episode. So let's give let's give those listening a little background. Yes, you're a father. But tell us about yourself, including what makes you a father at this point.
Okay, so I can start as far back as my second job, which was teaching. A lot of people didn't know, but I was 18 years old when I started to teach at Scarborough Secondary. And I remember a 16-year-old second former was trying her hard to get out of me what my age was, and I was ducking all the time. And one day I confessed, and she was like, "Oh, you just 18? We could be together." And I was like, no, not mm-mm. And so I had to develop a sense of maturity very quickly as a teacher, or else I would have not really gained the respect of children who were literally my age and some at fifth form level, as old as me and older. And so I learned very quickly that I had to be mature, and it developed a sense of teacher-child and father-child relationship quickly as well. And also growing up in a Christian home, my father's a pastor, I recognized that there were some shortfalls that he would have had as a father because of his commitment to the church. Sometimes it felt as though, from my side, that he oftentimes had to choose between his family and his responsibilities or his church. And sometimes church won out because he was committed to that. And so from early, I made certain decisions as to what kind of father I would be for my children. Before I had them, there were two things that I turned 18 and were determined in my heart to do: to be a good husband and to be a good father.
Wow.
So having taught for 15 years, fatherhood as a teacher meant being there, listening, interacting. And I could say on a personal level, one of the most difficult periods of being a father to someone who was not my own was when we had lost our first child. And I remember children coming to me and speaking to me, and some wanting to call me daddy, and that angered me because I said, these men, these mothers, these people have their children alive and they're neglecting them, and they're abandoning them, and they're hurting them, and I don't have mine with me.
Right. So you lost your first child with your wife.
Yes, ma'am.
And that after that you had students wanting to have you played their father figure role, including
Yeah.
calling you dad?
Well, I never allowed them to. I never
Right.
allowed them to. I always tried to. I became like a daddy, but I never allowed that line to cross where you call me that. Because at the end of the day, I have to maintain boundaries as a teacher. But yes, I
Right.
was playing that role for them, and it was hard to play that role having lost my own.
Now, this is extremely interesting to hear you say it like that, because one, when you talk about going back to being an 18-year-old teacher and you're having a 16-year-old student, and we know, you know, the dynamics between female students and young male teachers, or even male teachers and vice versa, but in this case, we're going female students, male teacher, with respect to heterosexual type relationships.
Mm-hmm.
What made you want to say no to that when we know that the opposite is the dominant reality, in that
Well, mhm.
most men, especially young boys, they would just have that relationship, and many others.
Well, because I was determined to be a good husband, there were certain lines that I drew in the sand for myself very quickly. So I cannot say I've had multiple experiences with girls. I liked two girls or three. One was an accident, second one was a mistake, and the third one I married. And at each stage, I was always aware of who I was. And the journey to find myself resulted in me finding the person who I'm with right now. I determined earlier that I am not going to be one of those guys who play around, and that was from early. And so there was no attraction. The idea of a 16-year-old girl was no attraction because I wasn't looking for a girlfriend. I was looking for a wife. So
Right.
I never had that issue of attraction
So
to schoolgirls.
so let's move into now your own
Hmm.
experience as a father. First of all,
Yes.
seeing that you were so self-aware from such a younger age at 18, or
Hmm.
probably even before that, what was your idea, apart from knowing that, okay, your father, who was a committed pastor, religious leader,
Hmm.
spent in your mind way too much time with his profession, and you know that you didn't
Hmm.
want to do that. What else
Hmm.
did fatherhood look like for you when you were thinking about the type of father that you wanted to be?
Well, I think one of the things that I wanted was to correct some of the mistakes that he would have made. So if I had a definite image, it would have been him, but more. So, for example, one of the big things that I do as a father now, and it is becoming challenging and more challenging now because of COVID, is the amount of time I spend physically with my children, playing with them, talking with them, reading with them, where it is I am available to them physically and emotionally in ways that they can appreciate. And I think that was, and as I said, it has become more challenging because COVID has forced our children to be in our physical presence a lot more. And that work to home ratio has become a challenge because your place of work oftentimes is is your home. And children don't have a sense of boundary when it comes to that. Like daddy is home, first daddy is home, I'm going to call for daddy. I bounce my toe, I go and call for daddy. I want to watch TV, I go and call daddy. I want to eat something, I go and call daddy. And daddy is trying to do meetings and write up notes and do stuff, and he can't focus. And then that creates a challenge. And I'm honest about that. That has created a challenge. But I was determined that my children would have more of me physically, physical interacting, playing with them, walking with them, talking with them, doing games with them. Because for me, those are things that were my father provided. My father, he gave direction and gave advice when necessary because of the time that was called upon him. Sometimes when he was working in the morning, when I wake up, he's gone. In the evening, when I come back home, he's not there. Nighttime, he comes back later and he's tired. And that happened for a cycle in my younger years, especially my teenage years. So, even a small example, I got my first bike when I was 15.
Wow.
And that was when we came to Big when I was 4. I had a tricycle. It mashed up when I was 5. And since I was 6 to 15, there was the promise of a bike. And so by the time I reached 12, I kind of forgot about it because it wasn't happening. And yes, financial situations affected that decision in a major way, but it left something with me that I was a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old now trying to learn how to ride a bike. So that is something that I consciously made an effort to spend more time, be physically present, being emotionally available as well as physically available for my children.
Right. So
So
let's
like yeah. Okay, go on.
you have how many children do you have, and what are the sexes?
I have 2 children alive because I always acknowledge my first daughter. And my eldest daughter is 5 years old, going on 6 this year. And my son is 4 years old, going on 5 this year.
Right. So you have a boy and a girl alive. How
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
finding the time to spend with them is one thing. What is it
Mm-hmm.
like, given that they are different sexes? Are there
Mm-hmm.
different requirements? Do you treat them
Mm-hmm.
differently? How is that?
Yes. It creates challenges because my son is physical, very, very physical. Likes to fight, likes to ramp. And I'm not too much on the fighting and ramping thing, but he likes to fight, likes to ramp. And he demands your attention. Judah demands. I call him Judah, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Judah is a lion. He does not let you push him out. He walks into that space. My son, at the age of 3 years old, he was on a scooter by stadium, and he saw a calf and 2 cows, and everybody was running away from it, and he charged into it, and he charged at these 2 cows. Little 3-year-old boy. That is my
Wow.
son. My daughter, on the other hand, is linguistic. Talk and talk and talk and engage and talk and hug up and cuddle and talk and talk and talk and yeah. And it almost becomes competitive because if she starts to talk, he now wants to talk. But he's not a talker. He likes to play. So he's now struggling and trying to find something to say to match his thing. And he can't match it. And that of course upsets her because she's like, the only reason why you are talking is because I am talking and I want to talk, but you don't want to talk. And he's like, well, if you talk to daddy, I can talk to daddy too. And so there's this competition that they have almost on a continuous daily basis between them for our attention, both myself and my wife attention at times. And that creates a bit of a challenge of times with dealing with them because what that means is if you give one, you have to give the other. And it can't give A, and give B. If they give an A, you have to give B, A the same way because
Wow.
B is not taking what B gets. B wants what A has. And if they give an A, you have to give B first, you have to give A the same thing. And so that dynamic creates a challenge because I'm aware that if it's not dealt with properly, it could result in intense sibling rivalry and a sense of competitiveness that I don't want to carry forward. I don't want them to look at each other as enemies, look at each other as, but you get this and I didn't get this because I know of adults who hold on to that trauma of when I was 5 and he was 2, he pony, and he knew I love my pony, and mommy didn't beat him, and mommy think that the weight can say, oh, okay, fine, and I hold on to a 6-year-old woman, remembering the fact that you were my little pony when I was 6 years old. I don't want it to be the experiences. So
Right.
my effort is, how do I ensure that my children grow up emotionally and spiritually healthy? That for me is effort in dealing with them.
Right. Now that in itself is very challenging. But the good thing is that not only are you aware of it, you're also actively trying to do something about it. And I was listening to you talking, and
Yeah.
I couldn't help but think about those who do not have a father figure at home, because it's a similar kind of thing. You are there and you are being dad, and there are those who will be existing without that kind of the role of daddy. Do you see
Mm-hmm.
the role of daddy, fatherhood, as being important, in terms of, even if it is not in a living committed relationship, but a
Mm-hmm.
man being there, present and active for a child? How do you see that? You
Yeah.
spoke about the ages in terms of when you were younger, you missed the idea of having the bike and learning to ride between 6 and 14, thereabouts. So when you think about the ages and the role of a man, tell me what your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts are on that.
Okay. So because I have taught for so long, and I am that male teacher, I was that male teacher who was very much also involved in the lives of his students. I understand the impact of not having a male figure present, how it is children, but teenagers in particular, how that affects their psyche and that sense of self. Being a husband of one wife, what I've recognized is male and female perspectives are vastly different when it comes to dealing with life on a whole. And oftentimes, children need the balance of the two of them. And when you don't have that balance, and I can't speak for the motherless child, because I'm not familiar with motherless children as much as I am with fatherless children. In fact, I should say I am familiar, because I find children who are motherless tend to have a sense of depression or a sense of weight on them, and a kind of, so I could give you an example of how I see this, because I go by the play park all the time.
Let
And I
me just
remember,
ask you 1 second. Sorry, let me just ask you to repeat a bit, because I think the audio, the connection went down. The last
okay,
point you made about the motherless children having a weight on them, and you can see what?
they have a kind of solemnness about them. In my observations of my 15 years as a teacher, children who don't have mothers have a kind of emotional weight, a seriousness about them. And I haven't been able to measure it per se, but I've seen that in them, especially with the boys in particular. But I was saying that the idea of having to find the male balance in how they approach life. So, an example, I go carry children to the park all the time. And it always amazes me how a lot of single parent females, or I may say females who come with their children to the park, their approach to the slides. So there was one parent who came, and her son was older than my son, and she's telling her son, no, you can't go on the big slide. She's parked by Corner Hall. Can't go on the big slide. So myself and the other father were like, well, why not? Because it's dangerous. Okay. I watched my son and said, Judah, go up on the slide. Judah goes up on the slide. He get up on the slide since he's 2 years old. Go up on the slide, slide back down. Oh, okay. And it was, she saw the risk and she said no. I saw the risk and I stood up at the base of the slide and I was there. So if it is that there was something that happened, I'll be able to help you. And
Right,
so what
right.
I've learned is a lot of children who have fathers who are actively involved have a more balanced approach to life. And it's not, and sometimes it's a matter of personality, because some parents or some mothers or some fathers are able to either A, find people in the environment who can provide the balance, or they themselves are open minded and are able to appreciate the nuances of male and female within their own selves, and then respond to suit. But it is, you can almost measure it in a school environment. When you put them in a class and you can look, and after probably 1 month of interacting with children, you can tell who the influences are. If they have male figures in the home, if those male figures keep them in line or keep them in check or have a good relationship with them, both male and female. And so I'm always careful to say that children need both parents in the home, not they need fathers, and that means that mothers are not. They need both sides of the coin, because there's always something that fathers offer that mothers don't offer, or offer at the same level as fathers can, and vice versa.
Right. So there's that need for that at the very core, male to female balance,
Yeah.
man to woman balance. Let me ask you this though, as a teacher, you have a background in theater arts.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that has set you apart, that skill, that experience has set you apart when it comes to recognizing, appreciating, and responding to the aspects that you've just highlighted there? Because we have several people who are wrong, men, masculine men, traditionally masculine men, and they don't necessarily pick up on some of these things. You have fathers who, I know guys who say, well, listen, this woman put me in court for maintenance because of some kind of stupid thing. I ain't giving she more than the court say, and I'm not going and see the children, and I'm not dealing with this, and I'm not dealing with that. And yes, there may be room for, the hurt between the adult male and the adult female parents, but some men take, and we're talking fatherhood here. So for people who are listening to this podcast episode, it's not that we're not holding women accountable. We are discussing fatherhood, right?
Yeah.
So some men, some fathers will use the hurt or whatever they feel towards the mother of their child and decide to disconnect from the child. You are a man. You are pointing to something different. What do you think accounts for that kind of behavior, and maybe why you're able to see it different?
I remember that a story about a twin who grew up in the home of an alcoholic father. And one twin became an alcoholic because of the example he had seen in his father. And the other twin never touched a bottle because of the example he saw in his father. For me, because I made certain decisions and didn't allow the space or the culture or the environment or even my own weaknesses, because I would have recognized stuff about myself early that I needed to address. For example, my temper. I needed to address my temper and how I deal with conflict, because I deal with conflict sometimes in a very wrong way. I don't say how I feel. I don't say I like something, and I become a volcano and it just explodes on people. So I recognize of my own self, I need to address it. And what I realized, especially as a teacher with men and boys, is that we don't necessarily ask boys who they want to be in terms of what kind of man they want to be. We ask them what job they may want to do, but we don't ask them to define what kind of man they want to be. And because it's not intentional, it becomes accidental. It becomes based on the pull or the tug or the sway of the environment in which they've come out from, or even to the situations that they faced. So, like I said at the start, I cannot envision myself, even if it is I meet a student and I am 38 years old, and that student is 36 years old or 37 years old. if I meet the student now, I still see student. I still see parent child, I still see adult and younger adult, and lines I would not cross. And so for me, when I see the impact of the children, and I hear boys in particular making determinations about being ignorant, about being arrogant, about being hard and unforgiving in decisions that they have made because it benefits them, and not looking at, is this the kind of man I want to be?
Let me
And I
ask you
think that
this.
for me was, yes.
What does what has examples of an answer to that question been like in terms of, let's say, young men or adult males, fathers are listening to this right now, and maybe they can connect, or even the mothers who are listening, and they may want something better for their boy children. When you ask a young boy, what kind of man do you want to be? What has that sounded like in terms of what are some of the responses, or what's the thought process?
Okay. I have asked my young men this question, and I have dealt with this question with them a lot. And oftentimes the response is, something has happened to me. And because this has happened to me, it justifies the choices that I'm making. And so rather than a determination to make a different kind of choice, there is an acceptance of it. And that for me, of holding accountable who you want to be and your identity, is something that I know, I'm talking plain, I know women do it a lot with men. But oftentimes how it's done and how it's approached results in a greater fracturing of the man. Because there's a question of, what kind of man are you, that makes you say, who do I want to be, as compared to what kind of man you is, which makes you feel as though you are lesser than. And whenever you put a boy or a man in a position where he feels powerless, where he feels attacked, where his ego or his manners or his sense of self is attacked, there's always going to be some kind of anger and retaliation. And so oftentimes, the only time we ask the question of what kind of man do you want to be, oftentimes is in a negative situation, in a negative context, where they have done something that you don't like. And so the question then goes to, what kind of man are you if you do this? And for me, if the conversation comes about as a general conversation, and so there's no negative connotation attached to it, okay, say you're 16 years old, okay, what kind of trip do you want to have? What kind of woman you want to marry? Why you want to marry this kind of woman? What kind of father are you going to be? If it's asked in that context, and the negative connotation is not attached to it, then it becomes an easier way of asking and an easier release. Now, if you hear a noise in the background, that's my son lying down next to me right now, but he's staying quiet.
That's cool. I just heard him, and that's the whole point. Yes. As I was saying to you before, we are discussing fatherhood, and you are actively being a father right now, so no worries there. What I wonder, unfortunately, time really flies.
Wow.
We've gotten to that point here. Just imagine that. But I wanted to hear from you. Any words of advice or recommendations to both men and women listening to this podcast episode on fatherhood, in terms of, if I have a son, or I am the guardian of a young man, and maybe you could probably think about it in stages, younger ones, adolescents, and maybe just a little bit older young adults. How But let's talk to the fathers. Forget the ladies, because we're talking fatherhood.
Yes, ma'am.
What can fathers do or say to aim towards bettering a relationship with their sons, whether biological, adopted, step, etc.? As long as there's a man out there who recognizes that, listen, something needs to improve, what would you suggest that those guys can do, those fathers?
Number one, be intentional about building a relationship with your son and your daughter. Be intentional. It mustn't be accidental. It must be something that is structured, that you decide on a continuous basis to do and to engage in spite of how you may feel. It is on the basis of a good relationship that you are able to influence in positive and meaningful ways. And when you have a relationship and you have influence, do your best to protect it. And when I say protect it especially from your own self. Protect it from the moments when they may disappoint you and you may get angry with them, and there is the desire to do something. I am always aware of, as a man and as a person, probably it's my personality, of the long-lasting impact of a decision that I would make. The scripture talks about there are some things that you cannot take back once it's gone, the arrow that flies and the word that comes out of your mouth. Be careful about the influence that you have and do your best to protect it. And then lastly, if you have the relationship and you have the influence, provide direction. Point them in a direction where they can be better, where it is that I am acting, I am speaking, I am showing because this is the person that I want to become. And that person should not be something that is tangible, like a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, those things are important, but character qualities. What kind of mother, what kind of woman, how do you view yourself? How are you going to treat with your girl, treat with a woman? It always baffles me how men could have sons who beat their wives or beat their girlfriends, or even women as well. It baffles me how you could have this situation existing. You are the one who, if you have the relationship and you have the influence, then use it to give good direction. And that for me is the basis of fatherhood. I am present, I am available, I have an influence, and I'm influencing you to be the best person that you can be. If you can decide to do that on a consistent and continual basis, then I believe you have achieved the basis of parenting, father or mother.
And lastly, before we go, I want to stick in one last question here. With respect to fathers of girls, not just the young girls like your daughter, but we're drawing on your experience as a father figure to teenage girls especially. That is a interesting stage in our space, because generally speaking, particularly as it relates to heterosexual relations, there's this kind of expectation of girls that isn't necessarily the same for boys. So boys can have sex with several different women and people may not think about anything. A not boy, well you are in the minority there, understood and respected. Right? Yes. But a boy could be in the age of social media. A boy could probably put out a video masturbating. I don't know if you saw recently that Soulja Boy, that celebrity rapper guy from the States. He had a few of his photos from OnlyFans leaked. right? And
Mm-hmm.
people were appreciative of what they saw. And I kept thinking, if this was a woman, would it go the
Mm-hmm.
same way? But anyways, the point I'm
Mm-hmm.
making is that young
Mm-hmm.
girls may present what society oftentimes labels or sees as a more embarrassing situation than what a young boy may present. And so I want you to just take a bit of time to speak to the fathers of young girls as we try to have decent, productive human beings in the end.
Okay. For me, this is a very, very touchy subject because part of the conversation is we are liberal with male sexuality, but we are protective and overly so of female sexuality. And there's a hypocrisy in it. And so for me, it's either boys can do and girls can do as well, or boys can't do and girls can do. I personally take the approach of I am not going to encourage either of my children to engage in any kind of behavior that is promiscuous. Why? Because I understand that life happens and then you find certain situations where it is you have children that you were not prepared for in relationships that you cannot protect and preserve. And I do not want my grandchildren to have experiences of being in a home where it is there's an antagonism between parents. That is not a nice experience to have across the board. And so for me, I would encourage certain types of behaviors for both of them when it comes to their sexuality. But for me, if you're a father of a girl, number one, understand something. Girls are not only trying to figure out themselves, but they're also trying to figure out boys as well. And as much as girls talk big, men are still confusing creatures to them because of how they feel. They will learn manhood and what it means to be a man from you. And so if you want your girls to make choices when it comes to men in their lives, be the man that can set the standard for them. Be that man. And again, influence and relationship. If it is that you are that man and you have that relationship, then when they begin to interact with boys and they are confused about why they are doing, they can tell you about it. Because women may have, I mean, I'm talking from outside in, women may have a different approach at times to girls and girls' sexuality. But fellows, men see it from both sides or from a different angle. And so oftentimes it's a little bit more comfortable to talk to men about certain things and talk about women about certain things as well. And so if you have the relationship, and if you don't have the relationship, build the relationship. Because they don't know. And this world out there is nasty to girls. It is nasty. There are a lot of opportunistic, self-centered, chauvinistic, and narcissistic boys out there who are actively going around intentionally hunting for and hurting girls. This is the world that my daughter is living in right now. And so as a father, if you're going to be a defender, it's not just for you to protect her virginity or protect her reputation. That is not, in doing so, you have to train her mind and train her understanding and her perspective so she can be able to see situations like it. Because these guys are coming good, they're coming oil, they're coming slick, and if they don't know what are the cues to look for, they are going to get licked up. And you as the man, you understand what those things look like. You understand what those things mean. Even if you are not that type of man, you know the type of men they are. So for me, I'm holding responsible. I already know the talk going to come. And my wife already tell me I need to be the one having the talk because I want to ensure that my daughter is able to make sensible sexual choices about her body. And what
Right.
that requires is open and honest conversation about herself, about her self-worth, and about men as a man, how I think, how I feel, how I respond.
Lovely. Thank you very, very much. I am going to leave it right there. That's such a potent point to end on. Thank you very much, Garnet Lawrence, for your time.
No problem.
Of course, for those of you who are listening, Garnet is a father, a husband, former teacher, award-winning playwright, among many other things. And you hear the passion in his voice. We had this discussion so that when you are listening to this podcast episode, hopefully you will be able to handle your business. Handle Your Business, a weekly podcast discussing a little of this and a little of that. Handle Your Business appropriately blends serious topics with fun topics, all in an effort to help you have a good or better life. So join me, your host, Lady Lashley, and some amazing guests every Sunday at 5 p.m. to explore everything from financial management to dealing with relationship challenges. Put it in your calendar every Sunday from 5 p.m. Tune in to Handle Your Business for a very helpful half hour to get you ready for the week ahead. For more details, follow at Lady Lashley TT on Instagram and Facebook. Handle Your Business.